Welcome to the Writing 1 presentation, Make It Better, Revising Your Work. Please follow along with this presentation by turning to Chapter 35 and How to Write Anything. You'll also find a wonderful list on page 306 of your Pocket Style Manual. It's a checklist for global revision. We won't go all the way through that here, but I do reference it a little bit, and I highly recommend using that in the checklist for revisiting the Writing Center on page 307. Again, those are in your Pocket Style Manual. Thank you. Let's start our discussion by making sure we understand the difference between revising and editing. Both are very, very important, but as I'm using this term revising, and as I also use the term editing, you'll want to make sure that you know what I mean by that. So revising means making sweeping changes, and that's how Ruskowitz defines it there, whereas editing is finessing the details. Revising means a revision, and one of my professors years ago liked to write that on the, back then, chalkboard, revision. Re-examining your vision, thinking about your vision for the paper. In other words, an overhaul. Now, every time you revise it, is it going to be a complete overhaul? No, sometimes it's going to be a major reorganization. Sometimes you're changing focus. Sometimes you're making significant cuts and additions. Your focus is good and your organization is good, but you're adding things, deleting things, so on and so forth, and then including different or more research. That's what you're talking about when you're talking about revising, and that's very important. Editing has to do with maybe smaller things. Adding transitions, which is hugely important. Expanding explanations and details. Again, you're not really changing a lot, you're adding more to it. And then grammar, spelling, working on your wording, checking your citations, improving your sentence structure. Those are all, again, good things to do, things that you should be doing. Those more fall under the category of editing. So once you've written your paper, or written most of your paper, these are some questions to help you know how much you need to revise and where you should focus as you revise. First, you ask yourself, does the project meet the assignment? It's a good thing as you're writing several times throughout the writing process itself and the organization process before that to look at the assignment and make sure you're meeting that. And even if you're not sure or if it's a little bit confusing, talk to the professor. That can often be a hard thing to discern is if you're meeting the assignment. So get help with that if you need to. You also want to ask, does a project reach its intended audience? Sometimes that's more up to you than in the assignment itself, but you want to make sure that that's consistent throughout the paper. You also want to make sure the project does justice to its subject. In other words, is it worthy of the subject that you're writing about, or are you just kind of approaching it in a halfway kind of way? You want to ask yourself, does the paper flow? Does the organization work for the reader? Do you have good transitions? Are those things that you need to work on? Sometimes when you don't have transitions, it's not just because you forgot to put transitions in. It's because your organization is really crazy and there's no possible reasonable way to transition between one point from another, and you need to work on your organization. So that's a good place to start asking about transitions. And then, is the paper readable? In other words, can someone else read it reasonably, look through there, and it makes sense to them? Sometimes that won't be the case. You need to revise. When it comes to editing, here are some other questions you can ask. Is the format correct right down to the details? Again, maybe you're using APA, maybe you're using MLA. You want to make sure that you're getting those right. Make some minor adjustments. Grammar and mechanics, those are always going to be a work in process. Very few of us are going to be perfect with that. Some of us are very, very far from perfect, and we're all coming at this from a different place. So you need to become more and more aware of how good your grammar is, where your grammar is. Some of us know it's not in great shape, and we need to spend more time with that editing. You also want to ask yourself about the spelling. Is the spelling correct? And get some help with that. Most of us are writing our papers in Microsoft Word or another word processing program where we have access to spell check. So you have access to it. It's there. It's a wonderful, amazing tool. Some of us didn't have that when we first started writing papers. So please, please use it. One thing that spell check doesn't always do is looks for the way that you spell words, that maybe there are different pronunciations of the same word. Maybe there are different versions of the word. For example, there, and there. You might not be using the right there. So it's not really going to catch that. But even so, spell check can really help you. So please run it through. We've just covered a lot of ground and a lot of different things to consider when revising. And Hopefully that has gotten across the importance and the seriousness of it to you. But also sometimes it can be a little intimidating because you've written this paper and now you're being asked to ask a ton of questions and go back and look through all these things. So here's some strategies to help with that. One is to revise early and often. Some students just like to write the whole paper and then go back and look at it from there. But many of us, it helps if we revise a paragraph at a time. Some of the larger things you can't really do until the whole paper is written, but oftentimes you can go back over a paragraph and say, okay, is the organization good? Does it make sense? Does it relate back to the thesis? Asking yourself these questions as you go along helps it become more manageable. Another idea is to look for the big issues first before moving on to the editing level. And early on we talked about revision versus editing. If you need to go back and look at that, you can. But looking for the huge issues first is a good way to go, because that way, if you run out of time or, God forbid, you have to make a major revision on something and completely overhaul your paper, if that is necessary, then going back and checking the grammar and spelling before you did that doesn't make sense, because you're going to have to go back and check grammar and spelling again after you make that overhaul. So look for those big issues first. You want to read through it to look for specific issues with different individual readings. So read through it a number of times and look for specific things each time. In the transition presentation, I talked about reading through once just to look for transitions. Another idea is to read through just once looking for spelling errors. And those are editing level things. But sometimes you want to read through it just looking at the organization and that alone. Something that really helps is to read it aloud to somebody and get a roommate, if you're living with parents or siblings or a significant other, recruit that person. That person's probably invested in your education a little bit or cares about you, or again, maybe it's just a roommate, maybe they're a teammate or something. They should be able to help you. So read it aloud to somebody, even if that person does not give any feedback, even if that person is a bump on a log, even if that person says, I've never taken any college classes, why would you ask my opinion? Just reading it aloud, you would be amazed at the things that you catch. And if you read it aloud backward, you'll catch even more. That sounds silly and ridiculous, but believe me, it really helps. What often happens is, in our minds, we've been through these papers a bunch of times. We know we could almost go through and recite the paper by the time we're done reading through it. And what happens is sometimes our mind fills in the gaps. So we think words are there that aren't there. Or we think that ideas are clear because we've gone over those ideas in our head so many times. So reading it aloud to somebody and that person say, whoa, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Hopefully they're nicer about that. But that can help, and that's why we do a peer revision process in this class as well. And then reading it aloud backwards helps us catch those words that maybe we've skipped in our minds, have filled them in, but they're not actually in the paper. So those can really help. And then again, get help throughout the process. There are people here to help you. If you're in an online class, of course, you can talk to your instructor. The Writing Center is willing to look at some things online. The Writing Lab, I call it sometimes Writing Lab, Writing Center. Either way, whatever you want to call it, they can help you. So get some help throughout the process. Some of us know people who are pretty decent writers, and we can get help from them as well. But getting help throughout the process, not just at the very end, will be a big factor for you. I do highly recommend that you make use of our writing lab here at Ancilla College. You can ask them to help you from step one, from the brainstorming to understanding the assignment, on through every aspect of your paper. You can get help. And some of those who work there are actually professors and people who teach. Some of the people who work there are other students who have been through these classes and did pretty well in them and can give you some good advice. So it's very helpful for you. If you're taking this as an online class, you can also email it to them. You can look on our website and find their writing lab information, contact information, and I'll have that posted on the class website as well. So please take advantage of their services.